mentioned in comment number 4 of the analysis.
Thank you.
Members, gray water is the water that flows from our sinks, our showers, our washing machines in a state with as frequent and severe water shortages as we have here in California. Gray water is a great source of water for outdoor landscaping and indoor toilet use. 2 years ago, I offered Senate Bill 1258 to require the Department of Housing and Community Development to develop building standards for indoor and outdoor use of gray water in residential settings. That bill received a unanimous vote in the legislature, was signed into law, and resulted in standards now that facilitate the installation of gray water systems in homes, saving as much as 22,000 gallons per home when it's operating. It's now time to move on to non-residential buildings. This bill requires the Building Standards Commission to develop building standards for the indoor and outdoor use of gray water systems in non-residential settings. The bill is supported by the environmental community that sees the potential for huge water savings, as well as the building industry that wants more alternatives to meet more stringent water budgets. I urge your aye vote in what I consider a bipartisan bill.
Great. Thank you, Senator. Any questions of Senator Lowenthal?
I would move the bill, but I'm before him yet.
So if you'd move it, I'd second it. And we don't have okay. We have to quorum first. Okay. We haven't taken roll call yet. Okay. Any questions of Senator Lowenthal? If not, witnesses in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. I'm Bob Raymer, Senior Engineer and Technical Director for the California Building Industry Association. We worked very diligently with the Senator 2 years ago with this Bill SB 1258. We also worked with the Building Standards Commission and Department of Housing and Development of the residential regs. This bill would now provide continuity with those residential standards and strong support. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Scott Wetch on behalf of the California State Pipe Trades Council and the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials. In support of the bill, I want to thank the committee staff and the author staff for working out some amendments to ensure that the model code process is maintained through the adoption of these standards, and with that, we support the bill. Thank you.
Robert Callahan with the California Chamber of Commerce here in support.
Great. Thank you. Any other witnesses in support?
Lori Chan on behalf of Clean Water Action in support.
Okay, anybody else? Come on out.
Laura Bresnay, Planning and Conservation League in support.
Okay. Anybody else? I think that's it, Senator. Any closing remarks?
I urge your aye vote.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Any opposition? They just didn't line up.
Absolutely right.
There was just no opposition, so they weren't lining up. So it's an amazing bill you're doing here, sir. So thank you.
Thank you. Good luck with the budget.
I'm staying. We need to discuss this.
Okay. Well, the bill will be on call until we establish quorum. Thank you, Senator. Ms. Keogh, SB 346. Senator Keogh, welcome.
Good afternoon, members. We'll change that no opposition situation right now. Which would you prefer to start with?
Item 1.
And that is 346?
346.
All right. This is copper and brake pads. I want to thank you for your work on this and the work on the committee analysis. We appreciate it. I'd like to accept the suggestions on page 4 of the analysis. Both items we'll take as amendments here or in the next committee or however you like it. All righty?
They'll be accepted here.
Thank you. And that's to make sure that we're in compliance with green chemistry statute, or that there's no conflict. All righty. Members, this has to do with the amount of copper that is currently in automotive and vehicle brake pads. According to recent scientific studies, elevated copper levels are occurring in urban watersheds across California. In 2006, 51 water bodies exceeded copper amounts allowed under state and federal regulations. The fine dust from copper used in brake pads has been found to make up more than half of the copper found in watersheds. We have a problem. Copper is toxic. It impairs the ability of salmon to escape predators and return to their home streams, amongst other impacts on wildlife and plants. The second is that under the Federal Clean Water Act, regional water boards in San Diego and Los Angeles have had imposed on them severe copper deadlines for 100% compliance by 2028. More deadlines for other urban watersheds are likely expected in the near future. Copper is technically difficult and expensive to remove from stormwater runoff, and the better way for cities and counties to deal with this pollution is to go to the source, eliminate copper pollution in this bill having to do with brake pads. And there are, of course, other copper issues with paints and things, but we're addressing brake pads. I don't know if, coming from local government, if you've dealt with federal clean water enforcement, but it is an extremely expensive issue for local government, cities and counties, whether it has to do with sewage treatment or, in this case, stormwater runoff. That is why the bill is so critically needed. The bill will require the use of copper in brake pads to be no more than 0.5% by 2025. The bill also complements green chemistry by requiring manufacturers to follow alternative analysis required under the green chemistry statute. This will ensure that we don't wind up with a worse pollution problem from the solution to copper. So we want to have a healthy solution to copper. Without this bill, cities and counties may be forced to build expensive treatment facilities or condemn large tracts of land in order to comply. They can also face up to $37,500 a day under the Federal Clean Water Act and up to $10,000 a day by the State Water Board. I want to mention a couple of additional points, and I appreciate your patience. You will hear strong opposition and concern from a number of businesses and car manufacturers. This bill has been on, this is the second year for this bill. It's been under discussion for the entire session. We have been talking about the need for a deadline extension, commonly referred to as an off-ramp, if brake pad manufacturers can't comply by the 2025 deadline. Okay, did I misspeak and say 2028 earlier? It's 2025. An off-ramp has been discussed for the past several months with our working group, but until we have a date, the 2025 date to work with, it's hard to structure an off-ramp until we are agreed on a date, or at least agree that that's our starting point for discussion. Whatever off-ramps we may eventually wind up agreeing on, it will have to be a reasonable deadline extension. It has to quantify the amount of copper impacted. It has to be enforceable, and it has to include a timeline that cities and counties can meet their total daily load limits. All right. The industry will tell you they want a longer timeline, 3032. That compliance date was in the previous bill up until a couple of weeks ago. That date was based on a rough estimate by the stakeholders having to do with a earlier part of the bill had a $1 per brake pad mitigation fee that could be used for local cleanup costs. That the auto industry opposed. The mitigation fee is gone. And due to what the local jurisdictions now believe will be the federal requirements, we want to move the date to 2025. Cities and counties have received new cost estimates in the past several months that have shown their compliance costs to be higher than previously expected. In my home city, San Diego alone estimates that their costs for compliance with the new federal deadline could be as much as $1.4 billion. You'll see the long list of local jurisdictions that are supporting the bill. You may also hear from our opposition that there is not enough time with the 2025 deadline for the industry to be able to comply. I want to just point out that the Brake Pad Partnership has been working for the past 14 years to try to address this issue. This bill is in its second year, just as what has been as one aspect of the discussion that's been happening here in Sacramento over the last couple of years. I also want to acknowledge the efforts of the auto industry. They have been participating and they're fully engaged. But we really believe that this bill needs to set a firm deadline and a specific amount of copper as a limit, and we want to move forward with it. The bill is sponsored by the City of San Diego and Sustainable Conservation. It's supported by a long list of cities, counties, stormwater management agencies, business groups, environmentalists, the U.S. Navy. I have with me Jeff Brosso, the Executive Director of the California Stormwater Quality Association, Michael Endicott from Sierra Club, and both of whom have been longstanding members of the BreakPad Partnership, and Justin is also here. I would ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator. If not any questions for Senator Keogh, let's move into witness testimony.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Brasso. I'm the Executive Director for CASQA, the California Stormwater Quality Association. CASQA is a professional association dedicated to advancing stormwater science and management. Our members are primarily local government agencies, cities and counties who hold permits with the state's water boards and the U.S. EPA for managing stormwater quality and the discharge of stormwater into our waterways in California. As Senator Keogh says, CASQA strongly supports SB 346, which will provide California cities and counties the copper reductions that they need to, one, comply with very strict federal and state water quality mandates under the TMDL rules, and two, avoid now billions of dollars in costs to try and comply, costs to the taxpayers, I might add, as well as potential penalties for noncompliance. SB 346 is the result of 14 years of shared fact-finding, so it's kind of an unusual bill in that case, and consensus building through a collaborative process called the BreakPad Partnership, which is participated in by brake pad manufacturers, environmental NGOs, state and federal water quality regulators, and local governments. One result of that shared fact-finding is peer-reviewed scientific studies that established that by far the most significant source of copper in watersheds and urban watersheds is the fine dust generated by brake pad wear. Also, as part of the BreakPad Partnership, brake pad manufacturers committed to providing new friction materials, new brake pads, within 5 years of the determination that brake pads are a significant source of copper. That commitment was triggered in 2008. As stewards of cities and counties, but also the watersheds that they're located in, that's what it comes down to for local governments is we're really between a rock and a hard place. The date of 2025 is not a date we selected. It's one that was handed to us by the state and federal regulators under the TMDL rule. It's something we have to comply with. Otherwise, we face the fines that Senator Keogh mentioned to you already. And we are looking at significant costs as well once those deadlines are met. Another interesting thing in terms of the date, why is it 2025 now as opposed to 2032? New information came into us from modeling that showed that copper from brake pads was even a larger source than we initially had thought it was. And so we really, the whole issue of compliance for stormwater agencies hinges on the fact of us significantly reducing copper in brake pads. Not reducing all of it, but reducing a significant portion of it. We believe that SB 346 provides the auto industry with a reasonable 15-year timeline within which to develop and distribute safe and effective copper brake pads, while also giving cities and counties the ability to demonstrate to the federal regulators and the state regulators that we will meet our TMDL compliance requirements and deadlines. On behalf of local governments and the waters that they're charged with protecting, I urge your aye vote today on SB 346. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Witness.
Mr. Chair, sorry I can't see over you. Michael Endicott for Sierra Club, California. If term limits were in place for collaborative processes, I guess I soon wouldn't be able to come up here and be a witness anymore. And that's a really important point to make, that the environmentalists who don't sit on the same side of the table outside in this world, we challenge them to meet their process and the TMDLs. We did go into the room for this collaborative process, and we've been at it for 15 years. And we know that copper has been going into the water bodies for 15 years. So that harm has continued while we have been doing this collaborative process. 2025 means that we won't actually be really kicking in a solution to this problem for another 15 years. That's 30 years worth of harm that is actually happening from the copper loading. But I also want to say that we actually remain committed to this process for a couple of reasons. This was an effort to try and do collaborative science. We aren't dropping on your table competing science reports and saying, believe my science. We sat in the room with all of the parties. We answered all of the questions. Initially, the very first question was, for some reason, when you step on the brake, copper heats up too much, and therefore it's not bioavailable. That's where we started, even with that question. So we're giving you science that is good, is something that we agreed to, and was a collaborative process to find out that, yes, copper is a significant contributor to copper loading in the water bodies. Prop 13 stepped up with $750,000 worth of funding for the Fate and Transport study, which I think will be a model for some other elements down the road if you want to try and understand what happens to small particles. And then that study was also peer-reviewed. So we're coming in with an extraordinary amount of data, of policies, and understanding each other's position. I know a lot about noise, vibration, and harshness, and I really want to communicate to you I understand their problem and what they want to do and what the brake pads have to meet to be fully satisfactory. But we must achieve certainty. We must achieve certainty so this can be incorporated into their plans for compliance. Without any funds, without any mitigation fee, if that's not part of this, they have to respond on their own. Actually, this effort to control copper goes back a long way. Even before this, Silicon Valley stepped up to the plate to control their copper releases from the computer businesses at the point sources. So we need that certainty for compliance. We can talk about it. We're willing to stay at the table and talk about what you would do if we can't. It becomes an impossibility. We don't think that's going to be the case. Another very important factor is why we need the certainty is that for the good actors who have already started reformulating, who do get there, who do step up to the plate, they would be instantly put at a competitive disadvantage if they didn't have a date certain. So we want to make sure that if any changes down the road happen, it's for a really good reason and not just one that's a floating deadline, which means then I can't let them off the hook and can't in good faith say the damage is going to stop. And then also that a brake pad manufacturers that step up to the plate, invest in their equipment, their tools, and their design, that then they're all of a sudden, why did we do it? Thank you very much. We urge support for this bill.
Thank you. Before the next witness, Senator, if it's okay if I can establish a quorum.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Nava. Miller.
Here.
Blakesley. Chesbro. Here. Davis. Fuhrer. Here. Monning. Reskin. Smythe. Here. Quorum.
Thank you. Quorum is established. Any witnesses in support? Please. Continue.
Mr. Chair, Justin Malone, on behalf of a number of environmental organizations, this is a very high priority for the environmental community, and excuse me, I can just speak on behalf of Product Stewardship Council, the League of Conservation Voters, and others that really would urge you to enact this bill now, make sure you keep a firm deadline, and keep copper out of the water. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moira Top on behalf of the City of San Diego. We are co-sponsors of the measure and strong support. It is highly unusual for us to be here on a bill like this. In fact, I don't know of any other time where we have been, but it speaks to the gravity of what we think the situation is and the billions of dollars, as Senator Kehoe outlined, that face our city and cities throughout the state on this bill. So we ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Chairman and members, Jason Gonzalez. We represent 50 cities throughout the state, about a dozen of which in LA and Ventura County are all listed in support. The only addition, which is worth noting, is the city of Simi Valley, who is also in support. That's for Assemblymember Smythe.
Thank you. Okay, Me Too's.
Good afternoon. Kiara Ross on behalf of the League in California Cities. I think you've heard the gravity of the situation. This is a very, very important bill for us, and we very strongly support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lori Chan on behalf of Clean Water Action. We support preventing problems that are expensive to fix.
Jonathan Clay on behalf of the Port of San Diego in support.
Laura Bresnay on behalf of Planning and Conservation League in support.
Kelly Moran, TDC Environmental in support. This will save industry in California thousands, perhaps millions of dollars too.
Linda Sheehan with the California Coastkeeper Alliance, representing 12 water keepers up and down the state in support.
Stacy Sullivan, Sustainable Conservation co-sponsor of the bill, in strong support.
Christian Foy on behalf of the City of Long Beach in support.
Casey Kaneko of Suter and Associates on behalf of the Board of Supervisors of Alameda County, the City and County of San Francisco, and the Board of Supervisors of Ventura County, which has a TMDL deadline of 2022. Thank you.
Pam Palitz on behalf of Environment California in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Christina Dillon DeCaro, representing the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, as well as the County Sanitation Districts of Los Angeles, in support.
Kara Martinson on behalf of the California State Association of Counties in support.
Randall Friedman on behalf of the U.S. Navy in support. We wish we had until 2025 for some of the regulatory deadlines we face over copper. We simply don't have the control over. Thank you.
Roxanne Miller, representing the Mayor, City Council, City of San Jose. We have a double role here because we are the owners and the operators, along with the City of Santa Clara, for our regional sewage treatment control facility. This is very, very critical, and we've shown that earlier point of source with regard to what we've been able to do in the Bay Area. We need this bill desperately. Thank you.
Christopher Trinnell for the County of Los Angeles in support.
Anybody? Okay, opposition. Any questions from members? If not, we'll move into opposition.
I'll get down if I need you. I probably will on the technical stuff. Okay.
Okay. Who's first?
I will be first.
Okay.
My name is Gene Urban. I'm here on behalf of the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers. I will try to be succinct and equally thorough. I have several points to make because the bill is complex. At the outset, I want to acknowledge that we agree copper should be removed from brake pads. That's not in dispute. We may dispute the percentage of our contribution to any particular body of water, but we agree copper should be removed from brake pads. That's why we had introduced a bill in the state of Washington, which was enacted in March. We went from introduction to enactment in less time than the state of California has sort of frittered around on the issue. From our perspective, safety has to be of paramount concern. That's acknowledged twice in the findings of the bill and thereafter dismissed. There's no acknowledgement whatsoever in the substantive contents of the bill that there may be a safety issue as it relates to a single class of vehicles, for example, school buses. It's incumbent upon us at some time in the future to come back and demonstrate, pursuant to some unspecified burden of proof, that we may not be able to make school buses safely anymore. So I would suggest to you that unless and until you are certain, the word that the proponents of this measure used, that this will not jeopardize the lives of the motoring public and pedestrians, that you can't in good conscience vote for the bill. Let me talk about the dates for a few minutes. We offered two different proposals. One, as adopted in the state of Washington, an on-ramp. Create a reputable body of experts who will review all the science and the engineering, make a determination that there is, in fact, an alternative that's commercially available that will do no more, hopefully less damage to the environment, and then 8 years thereafter, the prohibition attaches. That's what the state of Washington did. If that's not satisfactory, then take a date. We relied on 2032 because it was in the bill for over a year, and give us an off-ramp where we can come in and demonstrate that some vehicles, some classes of vehicles, some application of brake pads don't exist. Could be a really small vehicle that's heavy because it has batteries. Could be a really big vehicle like a dump truck. I don't know. Neither appears in the bill. All we have in the bill is an unrealistically short date that is arbitrary. Let me talk about legacy vehicles that was not mentioned. This bill would make it illegal for someone who buys a car in 2024 to go out and replace their worn-out brake pads with new brake pads made after 2025 that are designed for the vehicle they purchased. They would be forced under this bill to buy copper-free brake pads, less than 0.5, that may or may not work in their vehicles. It's inconceivable that that bill would move. The cars aren't designed, the braking systems aren't designed for copper-free brake pads. You're going to compel somebody to purchase those and put them in their vehicle. We cannot attest to the safety of that, nor will we. Presumably, the California legislature would have to do that. It's inconceivable that legacy vehicles would be subject to this prohibition. Let me talk about green chemistry for just a second. 2 years ago, you adopted the Green Chemistry Initiative. We have pleaded with you. Give us one forum or another If we're subject to a statutory regime, should we also be subject to a regulatory regime? As amended, it's the worst possible combination as I interpret it. We have a regulatory date certain, 2025. There's a reference in the bill to the first section of the Green Chemistry Initiative subjecting us to the alternatives assessment, but exempting us from other provisions of the bill like the confidential business information section. So we're not entitled to some of the protections that other product manufacturers are entitled to. While we're simultaneously subject to a statutory, we have less protections in the regulatory and may have to comply with a competing regulatory date. It's inconceivable that you would vote for that. How do we explain that to manufacturers who make products for an international marketplace? That the state of California has made up its mind that what the state of Washington did is unsatisfactory, but what it itself did may not be satisfactory, so they're going to rely on the DTSC. We can't explain that to manufacturers throughout the world. Pick one. Please, pick one or the other. But don't subject us to both that are just competing and quite nearly irrational.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? If we picked one or the other, would that change the industry's position?
If you pick GCI, we'll go into GCI. Does that mean I have no objections to the manner in which it may unfold? No, because we don't know yet. But we will submit to one form or the other. Would we, if you removed all the GCI references, would we still oppose the 2025 date? Yes, for the reasons I've said. Would we still ask for some response to the legacy vehicle issue? Of course. But if you want us to, we will negotiate a regulatory regime. We'll negotiate a statutory regime. We can't possibly negotiate both. No one would endorse that outcome. There are a couple other issues of lesser importance, but I still need to mention them. The third-party certification from our perspective is novel and unwarranted, and it's unclear to me. The bill refers to civil fines and administrative fines. Is it both? Is it one or the other? I don't know. There's no hearings mentioned. I have no idea how the fines would be imposed, and I don't know by whom. For those reasons, we are opposed to the bill. We would continue to work with the proponents. We'd continue to work with Senator Kehoe. But as this bill is written in front of you today, we are opposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Mr. Chairman, members, Jeff Sickinger on behalf of the Motor and Equipment Manufacturers Association. Our association's members are the folks who actually make the brake pads and are facing the challenge of figuring out how to reformulate them without copper. We share a number of the same concerns that Mr. Urban articulated on behalf of the auto industry. We, too, understand the extent and severity of the dilemma facing local government with respect to TMDL requirements. We're sympathetic to that concern. We are committed to reformulating our brake pads as quickly as possible, but the association and its members will not do it in a manner that compromises vehicle safety. We will not do it in a manner that risks the possibility of unanticipated environmental impacts. And that, members, is the inherent problem with the 2025 deadline. And I think rather than to take more time on issues that have already been covered, I would like to suggest for the committee's benefit that we spend a few minutes walking you through the timeline that was just passed around, which describes the process from research and development to deployment of the technology in a vehicle. I have with me Mr. Terry Heffelfinger, who is an automotive engineer with Afina company. They, again, are a brake pad manufacturer, and I'm going to ask Terry to walk you through this chart and explain why an across-the-board hard deadline of 2025 is not workable. And I'll also ask Terry to address the misperception that the copper-free pads that are currently available on the market today are in fact the solution that you are looking for. They are not, and Terry will get into some detail about that. I would also, as food for thought, and I would encourage committee members to ask any questions that you might have of Mr. Heffelfinger. The notion of putting a deadline in statute for which there is no evidence that deadline can be met, certainly in the manner that the bill proposes that it be met. And in point of fact, we're talking about perhaps a significant portion of the copper contribution, but not the entire copper contribution. It's difficult for us to comprehend how that provides the assurance that the dischargers, the local agencies, need to provide to the regional water boards and US EPA.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Terry Heffelfinger. I'm the Director of Product Engineering, Research and Development, and Quality. I work for Affinia Global Brake and Chassis. Today I'm appearing on behalf of 650 member companies known as the Motor and Equipment Manufacturers Association. MEMA as an organization and our members must regretfully oppose SB 346 as it's currently written. We urge further amendments to the bill that would allow for practical implementation of its provisions. I think as was outlined, the 0.5 change in the last few weeks to 2025 was not what we agreed to in collaboration with BrakePad Partnership or with key stakeholders. I want to make it very clear that the 2025 deadline does not allow brake suppliers and vehicle manufacturers to collaborate, to introduce new brake systems that meet customer expectations for not only stopping power, brake system performance, but most importantly for safety. Brake systems and related components are expected to work every time, all the time. This doesn't matter if it's a small light vehicle, a commercial vehicle or heavy truck, a school bus, a police or ambulance vehicle. They have to work all the time, every time. What we have in front of you is a timeline which has been worked out in the past that got us to a 2032 timeline. As you can see from the bubbles on this chart, there are 4 phases that talk about the research and development of new friction formulations that have no copper in them. Basically, where we start is the friction formulators work in the R&D labs. They do testing. That takes 2 to 3 years. From there, they work with Tier 1 manufacturers who look at the systems approach. That takes another 2 to 3 years. And then eventually, if we pass through that filter, we then can work with the OE original manufacturers to incorporate those low copper or no copper brake pads into their systems. Beyond that, then once implementation is started, it will take 7 to 8 years for full implementation to happen. This, again, is not a one-size-fits-all. We are concerned about safety. We believe that the timeline that has been outlined at 2025 is not practical for us to implement at this time, and we are unwilling to risk the public safety with new formulations that are untested. I would open it to questions, and thank you for your time.
Any other witnesses in opposition before I turn to members of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, members, Norm Plotkin with Plotkin Zins & Associates on behalf of the California Automotive Wholesalers Association and Automotive Aftermarket Industry Association. We support a rational pathway to copper reformulation. Unfortunately, it's not contained in SB 346 at this time and must join our brothers and sisters in the auto manufacturing world and oppose unless amended.
So you guys are learning language from the unions, huh? Yeah. That's good. There's hope. There's hope there. Yeah, brothers and sisters. No, I like it. It's great.
Mr. Chair and members, Brian Moss with the California New Car Dealers Association. We're opposed for many of the reasons previously stated, but I want to emphasize the problem facing retailers. In 2025, if this ban goes into effect, you're going to have 24 to 27 million vehicles that all have brake pads on them, and arguably the ban's going to apply to folks who seek to purchase new pads. That's an incredible burden on the constituents and consumers of California, and one we don't think we can meet. So we're opposed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Chris Walker on behalf of the California Automotive Business Coalition. For all the reasons already stated, we are also opposed. We are the service providers that install these brake pads. We're very much concerned about the functionality concerns already expressed, and for these reasons, again, are opposed to the bill.
Mr. Chairman and members, Tony Gonzalez representing the Association of International Auto Manufacturers. We have worked with the various stakeholders toward trying to reach a compromise on the issue, but one issue that we cannot compromise is vehicle safety, and in particular the suggestion that as of the year 2025, vehicles that had been on the road, whether purchased in 2024 or before that, would not have access to brake pads designed for that vehicle. And for those reasons, we currently oppose the bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, well, let's hear the discussion.
It looks to me like there's some questions. Mr. Davis, I think you...
I didn't come in early on this issue, but have some concerns, and it presents, I think, on both sides of the table, very serious considerations for us all. I'm certainly concerned about consumer protection. In fact, if the copper does run over into storm drains or what have you, and it has some impact adversely on our water supply, and yet equally I'm concerned about the safety of individuals on automobiles and brakes, and how do you choose between the two? We certainly would be equally concerned if in trying to resolve this problem and implement a solution, we fail to adequately address the issue of consumer safety with regard to automobiles. And so I don't know where I'm going to end up on this one. This is a real tough one for me. I don't really want to put people at risk out of our deep desire to make sure that we have a safe environment. And I do want us to have a safe environment, but I'm kind of undecided on this
one. Mr. Fuhrer, then Mr. Smythe.
Yeah, it seems to me that the crux of the issue is the question of infeasibility in the future, 2025, 2032, and this you alluded, Ms. Keogh, to the notion of kind of we called it an off-ramp, something which I take it as language for if there comes a stage in the future in which it is agreed by a broad spectrum of experts that you can't do it, then something else besides this requirement would take effect. But that's not in the bill at the moment. And I wanted to get a little more full response from you about where we are in the evolution of the bill as it relates to the invisibility question.
Thank you, Mr. Fuhrer. And I'll address Mr. Davis's question, too. We have been in discussion on this bill for a year and a half. The off-ramp discussion has been very active for the last several months, which is it would be some sort of a deadline, a reasonable, orderly deadline extension. We understand the legacy vehicle discussion is not the intention of this bill to make in 2025 to make every vehicle that's been manufactured a year before or older illegal. We don't think that's what would happen. In fact, we're committed to finding an answer that balances the needs of industry, the environment, and local communities to manage their total maximum daily loads. But until we have a deadline in the bill that local governments are comfortable, gives them some certainty and assurances relative to the Clean Water Act, we don't feel that the off-ramp discussion is really going to come to fruition. I want to get there. I want to get there. Believe me, I want my car to stop, and I want my family member's car to stop every time I touch the brakes. I mentioned in my opening remarks the Brake Pad Partnership is 14 years old. We have been over the manufacturer's timeline many, many times. The year is 2010. The bill calls for a 2025 deadline. I don't think it's incompatible to believe that American technology and industry can get to a safe, cleaner brake pad. And unless California puts this deadline in front of them, I don't think there will be enough effort put into developing that kind of that new, cleaner brake pad. There are some, and the water quality folks can tell you about it. There's a copper-free or close to copper-free brake pad available now. The manufacturers don't like it for their own reasons. I'm not an automotive engineer. I am a former city council member, and I know, and you know, what these fines can add up to for local jurisdictions. I'm looking at it as this bill will allow our city and county governments to have some certainty as to how they're going to meet the federal deadline that is coming as a result of the Clean Water Act. That's the end of it I'm working on. Not to diminish the public safety issues, but certainly the bill will not override or preempt any kind of federal standards for braking safety, the distance it takes to stop any size vehicle, large or small, and those kinds of requirements. And that's not our intention. Those the kinds of preemptions aren't in the bill. We are talking about how to allow local communities to meet their clean water deadlines.
Fair enough. Let's.
And one other thing, I don't think green chemistry, the initiative and statute, means that there should be, sort of a moratorium on every other kind of discussion before the legislature. We need to deal with this issue because you heard every county in the state, many cities in the states, the U.S. Navy and others are asking for some direction from the state legislature on this deadline issue, and that's what the purpose of the bill is.
Fair enough. And there are many good reasons to want to support an approach like this. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to figure out, let's say the bill currently says 2025.
It does. Mm-hmm.
Now, the bill says 2025, which establishes the hard deadline that you're talking about. But the bill does.
But we are still actively discussing an off-ramp, so to speak.
Right.
That would include legacy vehicles, and if there are special vehicles, we've talked about, dump trucks or cement trucks or some unusual or kind of vehicle that needs some special braking systems. We are open to that. What cities and counties need relief from is the millions of miles that are driven every day by passenger cars and light-duty trucks, and every time you touch a brake, a tiny bit of copper goes on the roadway.
Right. What has impeded combining the 2025 deadline with something that deals with the potentiality that there's no feasible technology to achieve the goal? Marrying those two concepts by this point, because you've been working so hard on this for so long.
Well, the off-ramp, for one thing, because of changes in federal regulations, we took what was a 3032 deadline and moved it up to 2025. The manufacturers don't like that. It just brings it in that much closer. They're struggling to meet their manufacturing timelines as it is. But there's nothing to say, we're still making progress on it, and I think we can get there. But we need to have a date in the bill so that cities and counties will know, what they can expect to reduce their copper loads by 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And we are still actively in that discussion. And I think if the bill continues to move, that discussion will become more fruitful. I do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, I know some discussions was raised about the legislation in Washington, and I was wondering if you could maybe address that a little bit, because obviously Washington has similar issues with in the state of California in terms of their support for the environment and understanding this, and so I don't know if there's the appropriate person on either side to discuss and why that isn't kind of being implemented, using that as a model that seemed to have support on both sides and has moved quickly enough to being enacted as opposed while we're still kind of debating that. So I don't know if someone could maybe take that on.
There are a couple of differences between Washington State and California in terms of the copper issue. The bottom line is they just don't have the same drivers that we do in California. They're not facing the kinds of TMDLs that we're facing here in California with the hard deadlines that we have. We have 4 the hard deadlines: 2021 in Ballona Creek in Los Angeles, 2022 in Cayugas Creek in Ventura, 2028 in Los Angeles River, which is a huge watershed, goes over the hill into the San Fernando Valley, as well as downtown LA, as well as 2028 in Choice Creek in San Diego. So we have hard deadlines that they don't have in the state of Washington. All those deadlines are up to 4 years, at least 4 years, if not many more years sooner than 2032. So that is probably the most significant reason. The other reason is that they haven't become aware in Washington State that copper has such a potential impact on salmon and their ability to find their home stream just yet. When that becomes more clear through the science, and that science is just emerging now, I think they'll realize that they have that driver as well in the state of Washington.
If I may, I guess my question is really that the Department of Ecology in Washington isn't aware of the impacts on salmon. I mean, I'm not a fisherman, but I've been fishing for salmon in Washington. To me, that seems that if anyone would know that, they would, the Department of Ecology in Washington would know that.
I think they're aware of it, but they haven't. The research is relatively new, and it hasn't necessarily been done in Washington State. So if you haven't monitored for it necessarily, you don't necessarily know there's a problem until later on.
If I might comment on that, Rob Duff from the Department of Ecology in Washington State is very aware of the effect on salmon. Let me just say, to answer Mr. Smythe's question, I feel that the Washington bill gave us model legislation that really gave us a solution that was a two-phased approach. One was by 2021 we would be reduced to 5%. The industry is committed to that. We have been working in collaboration with the BreakPad Partnership to reach that goal of 2021 for 5% copper. That does help the TMDLs in all the watershed areas. That's what we've been driving for. And then a second phase, which is to reduce it by a factor of 10, folks. We're talking about reducing copper in brake pads that make its effectiveness and coefficient of friction work very well on our vehicles today. Safety is utmost concern. By taking the copper out completely, we do not have today a solution in sight that allows us to remove the copper and replace with one-for-one to get the friction levels back up to stop our vehicles today. In order to do that, we will have to come up with hybrid cocktail-type solutions of aramid fibers, Kevlar, fiberglass, and other raw materials in order to get the friction level back up. So that's why the two-phased approach in 2021 and 2032 was introduced into Washington and works quite well.
Mr. Chairman, the state of Washington legislation has come up repeatedly, so can we just spend another minute on this? Is all right? And
yeah, that's fine. I think people, Mr. Smythe looks to be happy with that suggestion. And I've got Ruskin Miller and Chesborough. It's all about making sure that Cameron's happy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that.
So, Dr. Kelly Moran, and I'm here on behalf of CASCA, and I just want to clarify Jeff's comments. The state of Washington was unaware that the 0.5% copper level was necessary for protection of salmon. So they focused their bill on getting to the 5% copper level, which only undoes the increase in copper since the model year 2000 safety standards took effect. So they weren't focused on that 0.5% copper level, which we've determined through the science and in agreement with the brake pad manufacturers and the brake pad partnership as being the level that would be necessary to achieve compliance. Actually, the real level that's necessary is a fleet average of under 1%, so there is some room for this discussion. So I hope that clarifies.
Thank you.
That's really the problem for us.
Sure thing. And then I guess just one follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chairman, that I know that brake pads they're not the sole cause of copper on the roads in the TM. So I don't know if someone can address what are some of the other contributors to that, and are there similar steps being made, because obviously if we hit one group by as heavy as this, that still only gets us halfway there. And so I don't know if anyone can address that as well. What other sources?
Absolutely. I've been working on copper sources in discharges to surface waters in California since 1992. I've done a comprehensive inventory of all of the various sources. We've examined all the sources and developed control measures for them. It turns out that most of those sources are already being regulated. The industrial permit, the construction runoff permit. The state, at our urging, after some years of examination, just initiated regulatory action on marine anti-fouling paint, which was mentioned in some of the comment letters. So I have great confidence that there are control programs moving forward for all the various other sources. And it's also quite... The volume, the other thing that's really important is that the studies that were done through the brake pad partnership, where you hear the about half or more than half, those are annual averages and for one particular watershed. But when you're looking specifically, you have to look at wintertime and urban runoff to understand the brake pad copper contribution for the biggest compliance problem. And there, a number of the sources don't occur in urban runoff. And so some things people just don't do, like they don't empty their swimming pools in the middle of a rainstorm. So when you take that into account, brake pad copper could easily be 3/4 of all the copper in urban runoff. And that's the problem that we face. Compliance is just completely impossible without that. But you should know and have great confidence that all the other sources of copper are being addressed and have been addressed. We've been working on this for a very long time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're very welcome. Mr. Ruskin. Mr. Miller?
I need to, Senator, I need to just focus on some of the older vehicles. because I don't know if we attempt to address that there are going to be millions of vehicles out there that are manufactured today, tomorrow, over the next 5 years, not to mention, older vehicles from decades ago. And, this is a real issue. And obviously this ties into, for me at least, a liability issue. And, even according to the committee analysis, it states, at this time, the state does not know of any new copper brake pads that will operate effectively on the current and future auto braking systems. So, at some point, we need enough time to allow the proper testing, as was done from transition from asbestos to copper, to make sure that we have completely eliminated the liability that could be placed back on these manufacturers, and have a system like we do today, frankly, that works. So legacy vehicles.
Thank you. As I said earlier, it is a real issue. We have no intention of banning or outlawing vehicles that are manufactured in 2020 or 2022 before this deadline kicks in. I did want to, and you brought up asbestos to copper. That is another important issue that we want to avoid. Whatever replaces copper, we don't want it to be the next pollutant. We want to have a real solution that works for public safety and for the environment. The purpose of the off-ramp discussion, which is, a deadline extension, is to figure out a way for aftermarket and for legacy vehicles to be included in the deadline and functional. It would be. We are actively in that discussion. I have every intention of coming up with a reasonable way to deal with cars that are already on the road. And I don't think that we should preclude the idea that we can come up with a close to copper-free brake pad that would be able to work in older vehicles as well. I mean, you and I buy brake pads for older cars today, and that can be done. We know it can be done. And did you want to add something to that?
If I just could, and sorry for my back.
That's okay.
I just wanted to be really clear that one of the reasons that we've been dithering around for a long time is making sure that Michael Endicott and the people and the environmentalists that he represents, and also the fish that are being harmed, understand, is that not only we're not talking about safety, we're not changing that standard, we're not telling them how to meet it, but we had to understand why this long time frame, another 15 years of harm after 15 years of testing this, why it was important for us to be concerned with issues of noise, of vibration, because of warranty issues, because of incorporation. But you should also understand that today there are non-copper brake pads in many of the vehicles that actually stop cars safely. And when you go in back to the dealer to replace your first set of brake pads that came with it, you may or may not get the exact same formulation. So I think there's been an implication here that unless you have the exact same formula, you won't have a brake pad that will effectively stop your car. And so that's not the issue there. But it is important. We're not choosing between safety and
Chairman,
health.
let me just say, the legacy issue is a real issue. We think we can get to an agreement. And we're happy to commit to this committee that when we do get to an agreement on legacy vehicles, we will bring it back to you, or it'll also be in your appropriations committee, so you'll have ample time to look at it. But the bottom line is, until we start this process, nothing is going to get done to reduce the amount of copper in the millions of brake pads that are on California roads today. That's what we're going for.
Before I go to Mr. Chesborough, I think you had something you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, I just briefly wanted to address the issue of copper-free brake pads, which in fact are out there on vehicles as we speak. They're semi-metallic pads. And this is part of the dilemma of meeting a 2025 deadline, particularly in the aftermarket. Not only are vehicles designed to use those pads exclusively, but what we're trying to engineer away from is the problems that caused us to begin phasing out of semi-metallic pads in the first place. They wear much more aggressively, both the pads and the rotors. They generate dust. We're creating additional particulate matter from brake pads. That is a cross-media environmental consequence and not a reason why we would want to rely on that technology going forward. In order to deal with vibration, noise, and harshness, which is very common with semi-metallic pads, you have to increase, in some vehicle applications, the weight, the bulk of some of the suspension components and the brake system components in particular. Doing that increases the weight of the vehicle, creates a fuel economy penalty, which translates into greater greenhouse gas emissions. These are the kinds of things that the Green Chemistry Initiative, for example, would steer us away from. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that we're trying to engineer out of pads. And at the same time, I think that there are a number of false assumptions behind the notion of 2025 providing reasonable assurance of compliance with TMDL obligations, not the least of which is the idea that you're going to get complete turnover of the vehicle fleet in 3 years following the ban.
Thank you. Mr. Chesbrough?
I'd like to, now that he's not in the room, respond to Mr. Smythe's question of, gee, the Washington Department of Ecology didn't know about the impact of copper. Well, I represent a district that has California's great salmon ports, or formerly great salmon ports, and hopefully future great salmon ports, and have been very involved in trying to help to bring back the salmon and bring back that industry, both for environmental and economic reasons. And frankly, only in the last few weeks have I become aware of the most recent research and the impact that the copper is having in the Delta. And I'm not putting it all on copper, don't get me wrong, there's many, many factors, but the percentage impact that copper is having on the decline of the salmon in the Central Valley. And while, you know, the concentrations certainly aren't the same in the Eel River or the Klamath River, where there's not the same urban setting, the fishermen on the North Coast have been shut down from fishing because of the decline in the salmon fishery, which percentage-wise is largely the Delta, the San Joaquin and Sacramento Delta. So I'm not in favor of compromising auto safety, but I'm also not in favor of coho salmon going extinct. And my first reaction when I saw this was, like Mr. Endicott's, 15 years, my God, you know, we found out how compelling and immediate this situation is. So I have to say, from the salmon's point of view, this bill is a compromise. And from the salmon fisherman's point of view, it is a compromise. I've been many times in the situation where I'm trying to negotiate with a particular industry with a bill late in the process, and I understand they're trying to make a calculation about whether or not they can stop this bill or whether or not they need to sit at the table and get the concessions in exchange for hopefully neutrality or support that the author has offered. And I, based on my history with the author, I fully trust that Senator Kehoe, in good faith, is telling this committee where she's willing to go. But I also understand why she doesn't want to make those concessions without getting the industry to come to the point of it being a neutral or a support position. And I'm of course projecting into her mind what her strategy is, but it's not hard for me to imagine the position she's in. And I'm sympathetic to a lot of what I've heard from the industry, but I trust that she, in order to try to get a bill, is willing to try to address a number of their concerns. I wish it were here. I do wish that we were dealing with those compromises right here, so that the committee could be the ones to put their stamp of approval on that. But I would suggest the committee ought to place its faith in Senator Kehoe.
Yeah, I also think that the senator said the next stop on this bill, assuming that it's successful here, is at appropriations, where amendments can be taken. And she also expressed the willingness to bring the bill back to the committee. So what it is that you're talking about is very likely to occur. Because I don't think we have any more questions from members of the committee. What we have here is a conflict between some deadlines with the Clean Water Act, local jurisdictions that are facing significant fines and penalties if they are unable to satisfy the Clean Water Act, because some of the people who came to testify in support of the bill are the ones that are going to be filing the lawsuits. And if I'm an elected official, part of what I need to understand is how am I going to plan for what is happening in my community, and how much money do I think I need to set aside in my litigation fund, and am I going to take money and pay for attorneys to go to court as compared to paying for firefighters and law enforcement and the rest of the services that communities demand and that voters don't want to pay for because they think they've already paid for it a long time ago. You also have what is understandably a complicated set of circumstances with the vehicle industry. When they came to see me in my office and they were talking about taking out the copper, I said, well, why don't you guys go to lead? And everybody laughed and hit their head on the floor. Because you don't want to go to an alternative that is going to be far more or as troublesome as what you have right now in the copper But when I hear that there's an estimate from someone who's worked in this area for about 10 years that 3/4 of the volume of copper that's found in the environment come from brake pads, that is compelling. When I hear from the industry that there was an earlier negotiation that set 2032 that they believed that they could satisfy, that is impressive. And to lose the difference between 2032 and 2025 would cause me as an industry representative a great deal of heartburn because they're concerned about being liable at some point in the future. Now, what I am encouraged by is the senator's recitation of an appreciation for the off-ramp provisions. Can't tell you what they ought to be because I think there are people that make a lot more money than I do and are far smarter than I am that have greater technical expertise about how you craft the off-ramp provisions that allow the flexibility that may be necessary should, in fact, the technology not be successful in meeting your objectives. And your willingness to discuss and understand the significance of the legacy of vehicles suggests to me that you're all now using the same words with the same understanding. And so I'm going to recommend passage of the measure through this committee with the understanding that between now and appropriations, you're all going to continue to have the conversations and educate one another as to what it is that needs to be done. And then after that, looking at what happens in appropriation, should it be necessary and appropriate, then I would respectfully ask the author to bring the measure back to this committee so that we can have further discussions. You're too late, Mr. Davis.
That's my motion.
No, go ahead. There's a motion, Mr. Davis.
I know I hear the motion. I just want to say for the record, I just want to be clear in full disclosure. I'm put in a place of choosing between salmon and people in cars. And I want to go on the record, I'm with the people in the cars. Now, also I will say, I do respect Senator Coe, and I will support the effort that she will work with people around the table to resolve this problem. I feel that this is an unbaked cake. And so I will, out of respect for her, go with it. But I also sit on the Appropriations Committee, and I'm no guarantee vote.
Now, did you have salmon at lunch today?
Understood. Understood.
Did you have salmon at lunch today, Mr. Davis?
Mr. Chair, I got to say that, it's like often when we're talking about the water issue, it's jobs versus fish. This isn't people in cars versus fish. This is thousands of jobs have been lost in the salmon industry, both catching this fish and processing them and marketing them. And so these are real jobs as well. So it's people we're talking about. It's environment and people.
Well, and if I might pile on, well, no, because we're all trying to find the right balance. It's those jobs. It's also the firefighter and police officer jobs that are at stake in local jurisdictions who are suffering penalties that are about to accrue from the failure to adhere to federal rules. That money doesn't magically appear. It's redirected from basic services. So a lot of balancing to be struck. Safety, the environment, jobs, public safety, a whole array of things are at stake here. We have a very skilled author who's going to bring this to its right conclusion. I think we're confident.
And Mr. Ruskin and Mr. Miller, and then somebody go out in the hallway and find somebody else. Why don't you go ahead, Mr. Miller, and then Mr. Ruskin.
This is not like changing brands of toothpaste. It really is about when people step on the brakes, do they perform? And we need to make sure that people do not get injured or killed because those brakes do not perform. So we want clean water. We want to save the jobs, but we could not have any tolerance of a safety malfunction or imperfection. So thank you.
I understand.
Mr. Ruskin.
Just to say simply that having heard the author's remarks and the author's understanding, from my point of view, this is a bill that cannot be stopped here. It must go on to deal with the other issues.
Thank you.
Okay, did I hear a motion? Yeah. And there was a second. Do you want to
I would just, I want the committee to understand, I hear you loud and clear. Public safety is primary. It is uppermost in my mind. I don't want to choose between people or salmon, and I don't think we have to. And I also understand how important the legacy issue is, and I'm committed to figuring out both issues. On the safety issue, though, there's nothing in the bill that changes, impedes, or impacts federal safety standards. We cannot do that. Whatever brake pads are in cars, we're having to do with this bill or any other bill, has still got to meet federal safety standards. So I would ask for your aye vote, and I really appreciate the discussion, all of it.
Thank you. There was a motion as amended in a second. Madam Secretary, please call roll.
Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? No. Miller, no. Blakesley? Chesbro? Aye. Chesbro, aye. Davis? Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Fuhrer, aye. Monty? Reskin? Yes. Reskin, aye. Smythe?
Your bill is out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Now, for the authors that are going to present.
I have one
Oh,
more.
I'm sorry. Let me just suggest there are members who I may lose at around 3:30. So I would suggest an expedited presentation.
So to be grouped. And that one was Mr. Roscoe's bill is on call. Do you want to? But nobody else. Oh, but we have to have a motion in a second.
Okay. Before, if you would just allow me. Members of the committee, there was a bill that was presented by Senator Lowenthal. If there's a motion and a second, we can take the vote. There's a motion. There's a second. Mr. Chesbro, don't leave yet. Call the question on the Lowenthal bill, please. Or take the roll.
SB 518 do pass as amended to appropriations. Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? Aye. Miller, aye. Blakesley? Chesbro? Chesbro, aye. Davis? Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Fuhrer, aye. Monty? Reskin? Reskin, aye. Smythe?
That bill is out. Thank you for your patience, Senator Kehoe.
Oh, thank you. Right back at you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the time you took with the other bill. This is SB 1107. It has to do with grease trap waste, members. Interceptor and grease trap waste is known as brown grease. It is a toxic wastewater pollutant. This is not, members, the deep fryer fat. This is kind of the rinse water and the other greasy water that comes usually from restaurant operations. It consists of a variety of contaminants. It's removed from grease traps at restaurants and other facilities, cafeterias, schools, etc. These contaminants include fat, oil, and grease from food preparation, pesticides, and industrial cleaners. In May 2009, a report by the State Water Resources Control Board found that 1 of every 5 sanitary sewer outflows reported in between 2006 and 2009 were caused by grease. We need to get a handle on this grease. And it is currently monitored by the Department of Agriculture. Each year, hundreds of grease trap waste haulers collect millions of gallons of brown grease from grease traps, but no one is adequately tracking where the grease is ending up. The Department of Agriculture does not do that. In 2004, the most recent information we had, California District Attorneys Association reported that 15 counties reported 27 grease hauler prosecutions for illegal dumping. But since that time, that was a special project. The data has been very difficult to come up by. So that is a few years back. We do not have a handle on how brown grease is being disposed of in our state. Without a proper tracking system, we are not going to be able to detect and prosecute illegal dumping. That's what the bill's about.
Move the bill.
There's been a motion. There's been a second. Witnesses in support?
Jessica Toledano with San Diego Coastkeeper. We're the lead sponsor of the bill. There's 180 million gallons of untreated wastewater. We don't know where it's going right now. Considering what's going on in the Gulf, I think it's our job to keep the water as clean as we possibly can. And grease, according to the EPA, is 80% related to sewer overflows in our state. They're expensive. They're toxic when they overflow into the ocean, into our drinking water. This is an important bill, and we urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Next.
Paul Worley. I'm Director of Environmental Policy for Liquid Environmental Solutions. We are a inedible kitchen grease hauling company, so we're currently regulated by CDFA on this. We support this bill. Thank you.
Linda Sheehan with the California Coastkeeper Alliance, representing the 12 water keepers in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Justin Malone for the local environmental health directors. We regulate both septic and some other sewage systems. We're very much in support of this bill.
Thank you. Next.
Leslie Daniels, Sierra Club, California, in support.
Lori Chen, Clean Water Action, in support.
Thank you.
Roxanne Miller, representing Mayor, City Council, City of San Jose, as an operator of a major facility. We need to track the information.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Chair and members, Dan Taylor for Audubon, California, here today speaking for the San Diego Audubon Society. They've experienced this firsthand in their watersheds. We urge support. Thank you.
Thanks.
Pam Palitz from Environment California, in support.
Opposition?
Good afternoon. Dennis Albiani with Pacific Coast Rendering Association, as well as California Grain and Feed. We would like to state, and we've worked very closely with the author and the sponsors on this, that we support a manifestation system for grease. And we've always been the way. And actually, on June 4th, the Department of Food and Agriculture has been involved for several years in putting together a comprehensive package on the rendering program, of which one part of that has a manifestation system that includes GPS tracking and things like that. And we are actually commenting on those regs. They're going up to hearing. Well, there's been a request for hearing, and we actually will be commenting that we think they should be even stronger. So from that standpoint, we believe that manifestation system is good. What we don't agree on is the entity that this bill proposes to do it, and how it's structured with, frankly, unlimited fee authority. It was stated that 20% of the grease, the backups, the localized grease backup, is due to, grease, and some of that might come from interceptor trap grease. That's a problem. Nothing in this bill about the manifestation system will prevent 1 ounce of grease going into a localized sewer. That's not what this bill's about. This is about once the grease has been taken into trucks and hauled, where that goes. Now, that would input how we have problems there, where there is some illegal dumping that has been tracked prior to 2004 that Senator Keogh came from. Then people are putting it, frankly, wherever it goes, could be in a waterway or whatever. But that statistic, in other words, has nothing to do with the manifestation system. And a manifestation system will not make that statistic better or worse. What it does, again, so it's fine that we use it, and they used it at the previous hearing, but it will not address that problem. We need to find out where this grease is going. We understand it, and the experts at that are CDFA. They have put in, they have a regulatory system that tracks inedible kitchen grease, as well as all dead animals for impacts. They track it all. They need to do a better job tracking this. We've been on that, and that's the entity. We already pay for that program. We'd have to put up another program. In its previous form, this bill was identified as a $2 million cost, which is about $6,000 per truck. It has been, changed, so how much that will be, but that level of assessment will just drive more people underground, and they will not pay into the program, of which we support, and we're going to have a problem where there's going to be more unlicensed haulers. It's going to have the exact opposite effect of what we want to have. We would agree with the sponsors. Let's work, and we're working with some other folks in the waste hauling business on the regs that are at CDFA. Let's work on this program. Let's work on it, the regulatory path, and let's go there. Now, I'd also like to address, since 2004, one of the issues, there was a bill passed, 2 bills passed, actually, in 2003 and implemented in 2004, or 2004 and implemented in 2005. And that has been, one of the reasons for there's increased enforcement for less dumping and illegal dumping. So there is progress being made. We're not doubting that. But this bill will lead to, in our opinion, to more unlicensed folks and significantly higher fees when that money could be put towards enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other opposition? Okay, Ms. Kehoe.
I want to thank Mr. Albiani, because he has been very active in our conversations, and it's been helpful to take his information from some of the haulers. He mentioned a couple things. GPS won't really solve our problems, because knowing where the trucks are running around does not get to the heart of the issue of if and when they are illegally dumping, putting brown grease down a storm drain or something like that. So that's got to be fine-tuned. GPS alone, it does not solve the problem. There have been previous bills on the issue. The governor vetoed one in 2004 that attempted to strengthen the tracking system. In his veto message, the governor instructed the California Department of Food and Agriculture to review and upgrade the existing reporting and tracking system. It has been 5 years. There are no new regulations. We need this bill. Where we want to see it tracked by water resources because it's mostly water, the content of the brown grease, and it winds up in our water system, and they're the ones that are equipped to do it. So I'd ask for your aye vote. And, we have, excellent support, and I hope the committee sees its way to an aye vote.
Any questions or comments, members of the committee? Seeing none, there's a motion. There's a second. I'm sorry? All right. Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? Miller, no. Blakesley? Chesbro? Chesbro, aye. Davis? Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Fuhrer, aye. Monty? Monty, aye. Reskin? Reskin, aye. Smythe? Smythe, no.
That would indicate this bill is moved from this committee. It's next to be heard in agriculture.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience, members. Mike, thank you so much.
Senator Pavley. Welcome. SB 918.
Senator Keogh owes me after that. Wasn't you? All of us? Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I sat through that last couple of bills. This particular bill is co-sponsored by Water Reuse and Planning and Conservation League. And as most of you know, since we all went through all the water package and policy discussions all last year, you'll know that water recycling will be increasingly important to meet our water needs here in California. Each year, California discharges about 4 million acre-feet of wastewater into the ocean. More than the State Water Project delivers to the Bay Area, the Central Valley, and Southern California. Much of that water could be recycled. However, because the state has not adopted uniform safety standards, the permitting and design processes for building and operating water recycling facilities are unpredictable and are discouraging local communities from tapping into this major water source.
Move the bill. Is there opposition to this bill?
No.
Okay. Just a suggestion. Motion and a second.
So anyway, the bill would do a couple of things, just developing and adopting a uniform water recycling criteria for indirect potable water reuse and investigate the possibility of developing water recycling criteria for direct potable reuse. And I've got a few witnesses. Assemblymember Namba, if you would care to hear from them.
I'd love to hear from all your witnesses. Provided it doesn't chase off members who vote.
Mr. Chairman, Richard Harris, on behalf of Water Reuse California, we're co-sponsors and happy to be here. I have a 15-minute presentation on the effect of recycled water on salmon, if you'd like. Okay.
Copper.
Salmon versus people.
It's not a choice between people. For both.
Salmon versus steak, maybe. I don't know.
Salmon versus tuna.
Mr. Chair, Jonas Minch with the Planning and Conservation League. Really pleased to be in a partnership with water agencies and wastewater agencies to bring you a broad consensus.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Linda Sheehan with California Coastkeeper Alliance, also speaking on behalf of Hail the Bay. We strongly support recycled water use. We were on the task force with PCL and water reuse drafting the recycled water policy. We strongly support the idea of developing the criteria that are discussed in the bill. Our only worry, which we've been discussing with the sponsors since about April, is the source of the funding. And we are concerned about the precedent for mandatory direction of the fine and penalty money at the State Water Board because it's a very small pot, and currently it goes through a public process, a competitive public process. So we would respectfully put to this committee, and perhaps this might be as well an appropriations issue that could be discussed then. But we would respectfully submit that the shall on page 5 with respect to the mandatory direction of the fine money be changed to may, which would allow for funding for this important endeavor, but avoid the precedent that would be created by mandatory redirection, and would allow us to seek other funding, which of course we are doing because we very much support the use of recycled water.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Maureen O'Haron, representing the Irvine Ranch Water District, in support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Christina Dillon DeCaro, representing the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, as well as the County Sanitation Districts of Los Angeles, in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kathy Koa, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, in support.
Leslie Daniel, Sierra Club, California, in support.
Mr. Chair and members, Kyle Packham with the California Special Districts Association, in support.
Lori Chen with Clean Water Action, in support if amended as suggested by Ms. Sheehan.
Understood.
Roxanne Miller, City of San Jose, in support.
Mr. Ruskin?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I will vote for the bill today, but I wanted to echo Ms. Sheehan's concerns about funding, and hope that will be looked at and worked out.
I'd be glad to address that in my close.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any further opposition? Any further support? Any opposition? Seeing none. Ms. Pavley?
Yes, we'll continue, obviously, to work on the funding portion of the bill, but it is a small percentage of the waste discharge fees. As you know, we can't use general fund. And also, an amendment taken in appropriations makes all this funding subject to an appropriation by the legislature. So it's not open-ended or targeted for a specific amount year after year. And so we're sensitive to the comments made and reservations. And I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Yeah, and this matter will be referred to Water Parks and Wildlife after this. There's a motion. There's been a second. No further questions. Members of the committee, please call the roll.
Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? Blakesley? Chesbro?
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Davis? Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Fuhrer, aye. Monning?
Aye.
Monning, aye. Reskin? Reskin, aye. Smythe?
Your bill is out. Thank you, Senator. Need a couple of authors, Ducheney and Corbett, or their staff.
Ms. Corbett's closing the committee right now.
And a reasonable substitute.
Yeah, staff would be good.
Yeah, I know. What? Just let her know. Just let her know. She knows about it. Yeah. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah, staff be okay. Right.
What's that?
Their staff be coming present Thursday.
For staff? Yeah, that's what I trying to figure it out right now. Ms. Corbett's on her way. Yes.
So, Madam Secretary will afford members the opportunity to add on.
This would be SB 346. Do pass as amended to appropriates. Ms. Kehoe? Blakesley? Monning?
What are we on?
I'm sorry, item 1, SB 346, Kehoe. Monning, aye.
Yes.
Smythe?
No.
Smythe, no. This is SB 518, Lowenthal. Do pass as amended to appropriations. Blakesley? Monning?
Aye.
Monning, aye. Smythe?
Aye.
Smythe, aye. 918 is SB 918, Pavley. Do pass to Water Parks and Wildlife, the one we just heard. Blakesley? Absent. SB 1107, Kehoe. Do pass to Agriculture. Blakesley? That's it.
We have Cheney and Corbett left.
Kelly.
You did Cheney as well, Michael?
No. And what does make it open? Can we provide, or does it mean it's in some hallway somewhere? It's weird. I mean, it's only encouraging, though, so. But. No, go Anthony. Yeah, I understand. You know, yeah.
Just keep slugging it out.
Thank you. Right, right. Yeah. Is somebody coming?
They just shut down the conference committee to change our order.
And where's Corbett?
Corbett is shutting down her Judish 112. We just shut down our. They're on the close of the last bill.
But one of them is on their way now?
Yeah, Cheney is.
So, Mike, your presentation, your policy project today on
business stuff?
Yeah. Can we get a copy of it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll have my stack of them too.
And then, are you going to do something on education?
No one's asked me yet, but maybe we'll see. Yeah.
It's a big urban issue.
Oh, sure. No, I know.
And then we look at the poor performance of this inner city kids.
Oh, I know. Well, the achievement gap is huge.
Doing something larger than just the committee stuff.
Correct.
You know,
No,
but I
that's
think I like your budget answer of beginning to repay, which is great. You know, but we need to look. We need to delve in a little deeper.
Yeah.
And hold the teachers accountable, but the principals as well.
Yes, right.
So I want to see you do something on that. For example, in my district, we have 3 public schools in LUSD. All 3 of them are on program improvement
Right.
innovation.
Oh, no, sure.
That's 100% of public schools. Yet we're expected, you and I, to not look at alternatives such as charter schools.
No, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love us to do it.
Yeah.
And
Welcome, Chairwoman Corbett. SB 1365.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Nava.
Move the bill. Second.
Thank you.
Been a motion and a second.
Would you like me to say a couple of words? My apologies for getting here a little later in the day. I've been chairing Judiciary, so thank you very much for your courtesies. There are committee amendments, which I'd be glad to take as authors' amendments. And just briefly, SB 1365 would allow the Department of Toxic Substance Control to enforce our toy safety laws, which have been passed, have strong support in this legislature. The bill is just a practical way to enhance the success of our toy safety laws, and there is no opposition on the measure.
Very good. Witnesses in support?
Hi, I'm Pam Palitz. I'm the Environmental Health Advocate for Environment California. And as an environmental health advocate, I spend a lot of time trying to pass great legislation to protect our children and families from toxic chemicals. And it's discouraging to have good, sensible legislation on the books and not be able to enforce it. And right in here we have the Department of Toxic Substance Control that really wants to do it. They want to test toys for lead. They want to enforce the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. And as a taxpayer, not an advocate, I say that if a state agency wants to take on more work and thinks it can offset that work by collecting penalties, well, I think we should let them do it. So I support 1365 and hope you do too. I think we need to do all we can to protect our children and families from lead, which lowers their IQs and shortens attention span, and from endocrine disruptors, which can lead to autism, obesity, ADHD, and early puberty.
Sure.
So thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in support?
Leslie Daniel, Sierra Club, California, in support.
Thank you. Next.
Laura Bresnay, Planning and Conservation League, in support. Lori Chen, Clean Water Action, in support.
Thank you. Any opposition? Mr. Smythe.
Thank you. I guess is DPH not doing a good job, or I guess the need. I understood the witness supporting and the support for the change, but I guess if what is the need for the switch, I guess would be my question.
Well, for one thing, we do know that DTSC already has a very good program for enforcing other environmental laws. And so they're in some of the very same stores where they may find these sorts of violations. So it sort of makes sense that they would have the opportunity and the authority to be looking for other ways to enforce our laws. So it sort of creates a situation where we wouldn't have duplication of effort. We have asked the Department of Public Health to give us some more information as to what they're doing and how many times they have used their enforcement powers. We're waiting for an answer back, so I don't really have a specific answer for you on that. But we do know that DTSC, through the processes they already have and looking for other toxic substances, they do a very good job. And we haven't had any opposition from them to include this in part of what they do. So I think it's kind of a common sense approach, really.
Thank you. You're welcome. Any further questions? There's been a motion and a second. Would you like to close?
Yes, I respectfully ask for your aye vote, and thank you for your courtesies in hearing me this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Madam Secretary, call a roll.
Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? Blakeslee? Chesbro?
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Davis?
Aye.
Davis, aye. Fuhrer?
Aye.
Fuhrer, aye. Monning?
Aye.
Monning, aye. Reskin?
Yes.
Reskin, aye. Smythe?
No.
Smythe, no.
Your bill is out. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
Senator.
members.
Senator Ducheney, SB 1284.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and for allowing us to, I presume, be your last bill of the day.
And just as a matter of a suggestion, you have one of the members of this committee that has to leave at 3:30.
Okay.
Thank you.
The bill that's before you, SB 1284, seeks to address a problem that we have heard from various, particularly small water agencies throughout the state, having to do with mandatory minimum penalties. This question of $3,000 was for each day became rather excessive, particularly for districts that did not have any discharge, for whom it was basically a paperwork violation, was being treated as a serious violation. And many districts all of a sudden had enormous liabilities, even if they had no discharge under their permits. So, with a lot of work from stakeholders, and we appreciate the committee's analysis. And there has been a lot of discussion today on amendments. If you want to just jump into that discussion, we have allowed for, discretion in some cases. We have allowed for there to be a one fine per violation as opposed to per day of delay in reporting and some other things, all of which are pointed out in the analysis. And I know there has been discussion even today that perhaps the witnesses might be in a better position to describe.
Certainly. Witnesses in support?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Jim Champa. I'm the attorney for Pico Water District, which is situated down in Pico Rivera. Probably the most egregious example of what this legislation is here to try to fix. Pico Water District was notified at the end of 2008 on Christmas Eve that it was hit with a mandatory minimum penalty of $627,000 for violations for failing to file discharge monitoring reports dating back to the fourth quarter of 2005 and for the 13 quarters subsequent to that. Some of those quarters there were no discharges, others there were just minimal discharges, none of which exceeded any effluent limitations. And when the district went and spoke with the regional board about that situation, they were told those penalties are mandatory, our hands are tied, and you need to pay us $627,000. This legislation is not an attempt for anybody to get as what's been called a get-out-of-jail-free card. I think what we've done with the amendments that have been taken over time is to ensure that there are monetary penalties that are continue to apply. There also is, as a point of clarification, the fact that there are discretionary penalties that a regional board could apply if the factors as set forth in existing law are applied. And we have tried to address this retroactively, and that's the last provision of the bill. And there are some amendments that are being discussed to try to clarify that and address the concerns of opponents to this. So I'll close with that. Also, I want to express our appreciation to the opponents of the bill. It's been a very collaborative process with Coast Keeper and Sierra Club, and I'll close with that.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Bobby Larson. I'm with the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. We do support the bill, and I just want to express that we have had a very good opportunity to work with the opponents, in particular the Coast Keeper Alliance, Ms. Sheehan, who is here, and we have every reason to believe that we can fully address the concerns that were raised in their joint letter. We've already begun discussions with them. We think fact, some of the concerns actually were the result of some Ledge Council drafting, a redrafting of some amendments that we had submitted. So we feel confident, and you can hear from Ms. Sheehan yourself, but we do believe that we can address all of those issues. I just wanted to speak briefly to, in addition to the reporting sections of the bill that Mr. Champa mentioned, that there is another important part of the bill which allows an additional 5 years to come into compliance with requirements. This simply brings the statute into consistency with the compliance schedule policy that was recently adopted by the Water Board and approved by EPA, which allows up to 10 years. This won't be needed in every situation, but there are examples such as where a treatment plant needs to be completely reconstructed instead of upgraded, where there's a regionalization effort underway and you don't want to upgrade a small treatment plant, but rather you want that plant to go to a larger regional facility, or in the case, for example, where you need to implement something like a water softener ordinance that requires not only time to implement, but time to have effect in terms of the results. So we are in support of the bill, and we are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Next.
Just very quickly, Kiara Ross on behalf of the League of California Cities. This is a very important bill for us, primarily because of the amount of the fines. At a time when cities are facing extraordinarily deep and painful cuts, having that additional money would really go a long way to keeping jobs on the street for both water quality jobs and for things like police and firefighters, which we're always trying to make sure that we can do the best budgeting that we possibly can. Thank you.
Next.
Mr. Chairman, members, I'm Ron Davis with the Association of California Water Agencies, one of the co-sponsors here to speak in support. Again, we have a situation where we're dealing with two situations, one where there's no discharge and one where there's discharge but no effluent violation. There's no environmental damage. In both situations, there's still accountability. The Water Board has discretionary penalty authority, and as the Senator mentioned, in the case of discharge but no effluent violation, there would be mandatory minimum penalties but at a reduced rate. So it would be more appropriate, we think, for the harm committed of failing to submit the reports. Strongly support the bill. Thank you very much.
Kind of like misdemeanors and felonies.
Valerie Nair for the California Chamber of Commerce. We too are in support. We rely on our districts to do a lot of our discharge, handle our discharges, and it would just be critical for us to have them keep doing it. With the size of fines that we're talking about here, it might not be possible.
Thank you. Next.
Mr. Chair and members, Kyle Packham with the California Special Districts Association. For the reasons previously given, we are in support. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Jason Gonzalez representing the City of Camarillo in strong support. Thank you.
Members of the committee, Kathy Mannion, Regional Council of Rural Counties, also a co-sponsor. This is a very important measure. We do support relief for these communities who have been hit with fines that have in excess of the problems that were caused, which were in most cases none. And we also believe that the ability to extend the timeline to come into compliance is very important for many of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Karen Keene on behalf of the California State Association of Counties, we're in strong support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Opposition?
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Linda Sheehan with the California Coastkeeper Alliance. Just to make a couple of quick points that weren't raised earlier, this statute has been in effect for over a decade, and so it's not a new program, but it's been recently implemented in a more significant way, hence some of the issues that we're seeing today. And I would characterize these as not necessarily paperwork violations, but these monitoring reports that are the issue of the bill are incredibly important to be able to track compliance. Otherwise, we have enforcement staff trying to chase down these monitoring reports, and we really don't know what's going on. So they are very important to be able to understand what is going on with our waterways. We have been in discussion with the proponents of the bill with respect to the concerns that were raised, which are these very large fines because of the ongoing initial implementation of this program. The way that the amendments have come out most recently allow for multiple opportunities at reduced MMPs as opposed to a potentially one-time correction. Which I think is what is being sought in the bill. And so the idea would be to move more towards potentially at most a one-time correction as opposed to multiple ongoing opportunities to be able to get reduced fines for something that should be fairly straightforward right now. Also, it's still a little bit unclear as to what would happen if someone did get a reduced fine and they still didn't pay. And that would be important to clarify. And finally, I think the equity issues with people who do comply with the law or who do pay their fines, which there are people who have paid their fines, need to be considered very strongly as these amendments are potentially being drafted. So we've written in opposition to the current amendments that are on the books, and we and the Sierra Club, who I'm speaking on behalf of as well, are very hopeful that some of these issues will be redressed and we can move on towards regular reporting on a monthly or whatever basis is in your permit and clean water through the permits. Thank you.
Any other additional witnesses in opposition or concern?
Leslie Daniels, Sierra Club, California. I'd like to support the comments made in opposition.
Thank you. Mr. Fuhrer.
Well, I just wanted to be sure I understand. It seems to me from listening to the conversation that we're close to a point where there is agreement between the opponents and the proponents. I saw what appeared to be an affirmative head shaking, for example, in response to the first comment that was made by the opponent.
We think that was a drafting error on Ledge Council's part.
Well, here's the thing. If the bill emerges from this committee, it goes to the committee I chair, Judiciary, and it will be very important to me that the common ground that I think can be achieved is achieved by that point. And I just wanted to, if we're not quite there today, I know the Chair may have further comments, to encourage that collaboration in the strongest possible terms if the bill is to emerge at the next stage.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Fuhrer. I mean, it was our concern that because we are double referred, that we need to move out of this committee. And we did see the analysis. We have been working off of the concerns raised in the analysis as well as the concerns raised by the opponents. And we think we can find ways to address most of them. We agree this should be like a first-time offense, but we do think that the situation that arose in Pico, where suddenly 4 years later you're notified that you had a daily fine that you didn't know about for 4 years, is problematic. That the report, if you have not in fact violated your permit, does need to be filed, and there should be a fine if you don't file it, but it should be for the report, not forever. And there should be some manner in which people are noticed. Oops, we noticed that you didn't file your report. We also do think that tenure, the extension of the 5 years, as was indicated, is important. It is discretionary. There certainly would have to be a hearing. The Water Board would have discretion to decide that you were being dilatory versus that you needed extra time to comply with a large capital project that might take 10 years to build. And certainly we want to encourage compliance, and we certainly don't want to discourage districts from being able to actually use their resources to comply and create cleaner water. And I know there's been some suggestion of a sunset. We don't think you could do it in 1 year if in fact we need a sunset at all. Maybe 3 years or so would work. I'm not quite sure kind of what we would be sunsetting, but I know that's been talked about. And I mean, if we're sunsetting the ability to do the look-back provision or something like that, I mean, that certainly, might make some sense. But generally, a sunset probably needs to be at least 3 years to just sort of see what happens. There would still be discretionary penalties for those who don't file non-discharge reports. I mean, we're not trying to take away the ability of the board to penalize, but to take the failure to file when there is no discharge violation out of the serious violation category so that there is more discretion with the board is sort of the goal. We didn't have the ability to draft all of that before we came to this committee and would commit to doing that in judiciary and working with this committee's staff as well, if that works.
Good. There was a motion. Was there a second? There's a second by Dr. Smythe. Any other questions or comments by members of the committee? Mr. Ruskin?
Just very briefly, I do have concerns about it, so I'm hopeful you'll work it out in judiciary, and I'll vote to pass it through today, but I'll reserve the right for a different vote if it doesn't meet the appropriate outcome.
Yeah, I think part of the concern is when the reports aren't filed is it certainly contributes to a certain level of anxiety. Mm-hmm. I point to the only because I was involved in an audit of the Every Woman Counts program, where we learned that the Department of Public Health, in administering that program, never developed regulations. They've had it for 16 years, and the reason why they didn't want to file and they had a duty to file annual reports. Well, they obviously didn't want to do it because they didn't want to tell us they hadn't done the regs. So, it seems to me that there's a pathway that we can figure out here. For the failure to file reports where you have no violation, it's different from the failure to file report when you have a violation. And I could very well understand how when the law was first written that you really wanted to convey to the participants how serious you thought this issue was. And so you look at, what is it, $3,000 a day?
Yeah.
I mean, that gets somebody's attention. And so I'm pleased to hear your representations about recognition of some of the areas that need to be worked on. Since there's a motion and a second, I'm going to recommend an aye vote. Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? Miller, aye. Blakesley? Yes. Blakesley, aye. Chesbro? Aye. Chesbro, aye. Davis? Aye. Davis, aye. Fuhr? Good job. Fuhr, aye. Monning? Aye. Monning, aye. Reskin? Aye. Reskin, aye. Smythe? Aye. Smythe, aye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Bill is out. Thank you very much. You're very welcome. Thank you. Folks who have been absent, Madam Secretary, how do you want to do it? Yeah, please approach the Secretary. You're welcome. All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.